I'm a terminally bad Christian friend. I am. I'm a terminally bad Christian friend. I'm a non-interference guy when I'm your friend. Totally am. I'm a guy that will not interfere in your life. And I see you kind of taking a path downwards, and my life's goal has always been like this, almost like, if you know Wayne Dyer, he's this weird kind of philosopher. He's always like, non-interference, non-interference. And that's kind of how I live my life. I don't like stepping in. Now, I don't think this is laziness, because I don't mind conflict. I rather enjoy it. So I don't think it's laziness. And there's this level for me that I think it's like I really want to mind my own business as a Christian. That as I do life with other Christians, especially my good friends, I try to do life with them and kind of mind my own business at the same time. I got a letter once from a friend of mine when I was an intern after high school. And she wrote this letter. She basically said, "Hey, Jeremiah, I'm really struggling right now with my faith. Could you just give me a call and maybe we can have coffee?" And again, the non-interference part of me was like, I'll call her, but I don't like to interfere in other people's lives. I don't like to give advice. I like to let them figure it out for themselves between them and God. And I found out years later that she walked away from the faith. And I have this letter, and it sits in my office drawer. And it's a reminder to me that there are times to step in. That there are times that we as Christians have to step in and be a part of what someone else's life is, even when it's something we feel really, really uncomfortable with. And this morning I wanted to think through, there's a possibility that we see Christians around us struggling and moving in different directions, and we don't know how to step in, and we don't know when to step in. And I hope we can look in the Bible this morning, into Ephesians, and look at some clues about the directions of people's lives around us and what to be concerned with and maybe not to be concerned with. So in Ephesians chapter 4 this morning, we're going to move into this verse, and I really want to get through what God is saying perhaps to us about stepping into each other's lives. Okay? So we're going to start this discussion in Ephesians chapter 4. And in Ephesians chapter 4, Paul uses a certain word that I want to start out as the dangerous outcome if we do not step into our friends' lives, specifically who are Christians, and we perhaps see going down a bad road. And I want to start with the ending as Paul does. And Paul in this letter, he's going to start with the outcome of a certain life lived that is the end of what happens if we allow people to take a certain path down a certain road. Okay? And in Ephesians 4:17, it says this: "I tell you this, and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in futility of their thinking." You must no longer live as these outside the church do in the futility of their thinking. When I use the word futile or futile, how do you see that in life? Like if I said to you, that's a futile life. That person lives in total futility. Their whole life is just futile. What does that life look like to you? What are they doing in their life? Like, what are they not doing in their life? Because this is a really important space we're moving into for Paul. The word here in the Greek simply means this: the quality of having no useful result. The quality of a life that is futile is a life lived that has no useful result. In effect, it's useless. Now, this person can look very busy. This person can look like they're doing the right things. But for Paul, there's a type of person that is living a futile life. We could say they're spinning their wheels. Maybe we would use that term for them. But whatever is happening in their life, it is not producing anything useful. It is not moving in a direction that's useful. This is the end of what happens to a person if we do not step in as Christians. This is the end of a Christian life as someone moves down a particular way. Some of us would call this backsliding, by the way. If you were Charles Finney in the 1800s, you would call this backsliding. That if a particular Christian started to slip, the end all of this life would be a futile life or a life lacking usefulness. Now, I don't know about you, I want to contribute to what God is doing in this life. I do. We talked about men last week. I, as a man, want to contribute to what God is doing all around me, and the futile life is the terror life for me. To get to the end and someone goes, "Your life was futile," that is terrifying. To think that all the things I did in life were simply empty and without result to what God had hoped I would do with my life. This is very scary to me. And so what we want to do as Christians is not just for ourselves not to have a futile life, but we want those around us to live meaningful, purpose-driven lives as opposed to futile lives. And what Paul is going to do here is going to take us down a path to move toward a life that is fulfilling, okay? Because outside of here, life is very futile in the Gentile world, in the world outside the church. It's like the newscast. You ever watch the news? I think most news is just futile. I don't care what news station you like. Most of it's just kind of an exercise in futility. There's no purpose to it. Because we'll watch the news and it's like this bus drove over a cliff, and it's a whole story about, all these kids died. It's so sad. And to you, Rick, well, we found some kittens up a tree, Susan, and we're looking forward to seeing those. And you're like, what? What does that have to do with anything? You're telling these random amount of stories to entertain me. You're telling these random things about the world, and the news will jump back and forth between entertainment. I don't care. I want to hear about these kids. I don't care what people wore to the Golden Globes this week. Okay, I care a little bit about what the guys wear because they look really good, but I don't care a lot. Okay? I don't care who was the worst dressed. Show me what the stuff that's happening in the world. But these news agencies and the things pouring into our lives exercise us and push us toward futility, a life lived in futility. When we move out of this room, we are pulled into a life of futility, is what Paul is saying, okay? And we have these strengths and these struggles, and Paul is challenging these churches, and each of these churches, to be, in a particular way, non-futile. Now, we can assume something here. We can assume he is saying to do this or this. And what we're doing is we look back at the church and we look at how he constructs arguments. And our desire, especially as historians of the Bible, is we want to see what the early church struggled with. And by looking into the texts, we can see that the early church particularly might have struggled with some similar things. Now, here's what's really important at the end of all this. When Paul writes a book, he's writing it to a church. So when he wrote about the Gentiles out there do these things that are futile, they live futile lives, he wasn't just warning us that the out there is futile. He was telling us that we can become like that. He was telling a church full of people that you can slip into and become something that is out there. So he says, do not live as the Gentiles do. Our first temptation is to criticize the culture out there, right? So he says, don't live as the Gentiles do. Oh yeah, they're bad out there. We're good in here. What he's saying is, you can do that. You can move this direction. Be warned. We as Christians can move towards futility, and we have to be ready and prepared not to do that, okay? And we can say, well, people don't have the morals they used to. We can say, well, people, in my day, nobody used meth. In my day, we didn't see these things. And we understand we're criticizing the outside culture. But sometimes what Satan wants to do is he wants us to criticize out there so much that we forget we can shift that direction as well. And so Paul sees Satan working in the church, and he sees us affecting the church, and he sees us moving in a culture outside, and he wants to warn us to not be what we see outside. Okay. Now I want to take a little side link here, because I think there's a beginning toward the futile journey that we're talking about this morning. The journey toward futility, it starts in a very benign way. As we talk about stepping into our friends' lives or families' lives who are struggling and moving toward futility, there's a first step that I think we need to really think through, okay? And it has to do a lot with our escapes, okay? Do you know what this is? Escape is what you and I do to take a little time to relax, okay? And this, by the way, is totally okay. So let's say you've had a long day at work. You've worked 10 hours. You got home, you got the kids to bed or grandkids to bed, okay? And at the end of that long day, what did you do to, survive, okay? Now, I know some of you are going to tell me, I read the Bible for 4 hours and I prayed for an hour. That's amazing. I watch TV. Pretty deep stuff, okay? I come home, and if I'm like, oh, I don't even know how to process, I take an hour, and I'll watch a travel show, or I'll watch one of my mystery shows. Sherlock Holmes is on tonight. I'm very excited, okay? I'll bring down the day with a quick hour of TV. I don't think it's wrong. I think there has to be a level where you and I escape reality just a little bit, just to kind of survive, right? And we all do this. Maybe you read a novel, maybe you go out and garden, but all of us have a particular escape we'll do, just for a moment. And we'll escape for an hour, and it's okay, now I can process reality. And for most of us, that escape is so we can engage reality better, right? So we'll escape for a minute, we'll kind of do a hobby or something we enjoy, and then we'll step back into our real lives more energized for what we can do. Now, here is what happens to some people. It actually happens to all of us here or there. Our escapes can do three things. First of all, our escapes can actually form our reality. So if you're escaping too much into something that is your escape from reality, and you start to engage in that too much, it can actually form your view of reality. If I watch too much television itself actually teaches me that everything is entertainment in television, and it teaches me that everything in my real life needs to be entertainment. And studies have shown you'll actually switch your view of reality to be more like television. Now, you won't go shooting everybody and solving murders, okay? But you will think, oh man, everything needs to be entertaining, just like on TV. And you'll move through your life like that. So when we escape too much, we engage too much into our escapes, they actually begin to define who we are, as opposed to strengthen our reality, they begin to change our reality. And this is our first step toward a life of futility, okay? The second thing about our escapes is simply this. Our escapes can become the focus of our life. Or they can. When they begin to define our reality, we start to go to work and hope we can get home to watch TV, and they become the focus of our lives. We hope we can get our kids to bed so we can enjoy our show or get on Facebook or watch TV or go garden. It becomes the focus of our life. Our spouses begin to annoy us because they're getting in the way of our escape. This is a massive signal that you are moving in a futile direction with your life. It is like the first big warning sign. When your escapes become the focus of life, as opposed to enhancing of life, this is a huge warning sign for you, if you're watching your friends go through this, that they are moving in a very dangerous direction in their life, okay? And this is where I see sin start to creep in. A lot of times it will be through the ways we escape and take a break from reality. Again, there's nothing wrong with a small escape, but when we begin to allow that to take over our life, this is where sin begins to creep into our lives and change our reality and change who we are. Now, the step from escape to sin might look something like this in Ephesians 4:18. They, being those outside, are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality and to indulge every kind of impurity. They are full of greed. Now again, we can say, oh, we see that all out there constantly. When we engage in our escapes too much, when they begin to define who we are, we begin to move down this direction. Let me tell you what Paul is saying here. First thing Paul says, as he looks outside, and he warns us of the process of what it looks like to creep away from community with God, or we call, again, backsliding. The first step, escape. Second step, he says, is the hardening of your heart, he says in verse 18. The hardening of your heart. Now, this is a very, very specific state in Paul's mind. It is he or she that has lost all sensation of feeling. In a minute, he'll actually say, in the next verse, he says, those who have lost all sensitivity. And this, he's repeating the concept of what a hardened heart looked like, okay? Barclay says, no man or woman is lost all at once. He is lost, or she is lost, in a slow move down the slope. And the first move and a hint that you're moving away from God is a hardening of the heart or this loss of sensitivity. Now, you know, the first time you and I, we mess something up, right? We sin. Your conscience goes guilty, and you're like, oh, I feel terrible. If you're like me, you pout, and you feel bad about yourself, and you walk around, I'm such a jerk. And you walk around for a few days feeling pretty awful. Maybe you put someone down, maybe you gossiped about someone, and you realize, man, I shouldn't have said that, I feel terrible. Because your conscience is there to flare up and tell you, see that thing you just did? Yeah, that was wrong. And the first few times you sin and you struggle with something, your conscience is going to flare up and it's going to tell you that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And what's going to happen is that voice is going to get quieter. If you keep re-engaging in the same activity, the same sin, you're going to continue to see yourself get number and lose all sensitivity. And as we get further and further into a particular sin, we don't even see it as wrong anymore. Our things do not flare up. I see this especially with sexual sin. We allow our minds to have certain images at first. Maybe it was part of our escape. We enjoyed watching television, or we enjoyed using the internet, and then perhaps through those two venues, certain images begin to pop into our minds, or we enjoy romance novels. Certain ideas about reality change who we are. And then we start to move down a path where maybe I've texted this person too often, or maybe I've met this person without my wife or husband knowing, and you start down a path that reaches into and toward an affair and a futile life relationally. This is what it looks like. It's a slow slope, and it begins with what I'm doing isn't wrong anymore. What I'm doing doesn't affect anyone anymore. This is where the hardening of heart comes in. First there's guilt, and now there is none. And there's no greater evidence for sin in your life than numbness toward a sin, okay? Beware the numbness. Always beware numb, okay? The world is a very dark place. It is full of human behaviors that are at best destructive, and at worst they are an evil from hell. When you stop seeing this, you are losing sensitivity towards something. Doesn't mean you need to go out and everywhere you go, okay? You don't need to do that, okay? That would be crazy. There's actually this song I heard once that says, the world out there is one great big festering neon distraction. Now, it's a bit dark, but it might be accurate. And when I stop seeing the world a little bit like that, as one great big festering neon distraction, I start to be okay with certain things and I become numb. This is a very dangerous place to be as a Christian. It doesn't mean we need to go out and freak out, but it does mean we need to be able to call evil what is evil and dark what is dark. And when we are engaged in something, our escape has taken over our life, that has begun to redefine what we see as sin. We start to engage in a sin too much. We don't see it as wrong anywhere anymore. We start to justify it all over the place. Now, this is not, by the way, a dry faith period. Total different. Some of you are just numb because you haven't heard from God in a while. That's different. We talked about times of waiting. Totally different. This is connected to sin. You and I are rebelling. We've gone on rebelling, and we become numb to that particular rebellion. It is a slow dragging away from us as we lose empathy completely for people around us. So the first step, escape. We engage in our escapes too much. You see a friend, and maybe he's spending a little bit too much time. You have a friend maybe who lives at Covenant Village with you, and they seem to watch television all day. This is where you begin to worry. They're engaging in their escape, and that escape is making them who they are. And then they move toward maybe a particular struggle or sin. You see it happening in the hardening of their heart. They don't see it as wrong anymore. These are signs that someone is moving toward a life of futility. This is where signs that maybe we as friends, it's time to step in. 4:19 says this, having lost all sensitivity, after this hardening of heart, they lose all sensitivity, they have given themselves to sensuality, they indulge in every kind of impurity, and they are full of greed. Indulge in every kind of impurity, it's preparedness, it literally means prepared for any kind of pleasure. You're just ready. You're ready to be happy and please yourself at any given moment of the day. Is there any better description of American culture than that? Any better description, okay? I am hungry, I go to Gear, I can get whatever I want any second of the day. I can get fast food, I can get sushi, I can get Indian food. I can fulfill any kind of pleasure that I feel like pops up in my life. It is almost the real American dream, dare I say. Dare I say it's the real American dream. To fulfill every kind of pleasure I can imagine. To be able to fulfill that and do what I want. That is the story out there. Okay. But how does it look in a person who is backsliding and slipping? By the way, this is a person who's trained in making themselves happy. We have taken training not to be like God. We've taken training to make ourselves happy. We are trained to be the happiest I can be. Now, here's the thing that happens. You and I are struggling with something, okay? And we usually hide it right away, don't we? We keep it really well hidden. We struggle with something. Maybe our heart has become hard. Maybe we've become a little bit numb. Maybe our escape has taken over our life. But as the sin pops up, we keep it to ourselves. We hide it. We kind of, I don't want to tell anybody. I don't want to tell anybody what's going on. And you keep it to yourself. But there is something that happens at one point where you begin to brag about it. I see this very, very, very difficult movement in friends of mine that are in their 30s. And usually it looks something like this, and unfortunately it's becoming a little bit cliche. When they were in their 20s, they never went out and tried the bar party life. They never tried that, okay? I don't think you should, but they never did. They never experienced it. And at some point in their 30s, they've been married for a few years, and they decide that it's time to go try it out with some friends. And I'll see them move in this direction. They'll start to go out, and I'll hear a little bit about it, and there's a switch there where I really get worried. They'll go from hanging out and having fun, and it will go on to maybe their Facebook page. Okay? It will become public. It'll be a very private Christian person that you thought was fine, you thought they were living a good life, and all of a sudden on Facebook pages, them out drinking, or them out having fun, or them with people, you're like, why are you with them? And you will all begin to be very concerned. Why? Because something they're struggling with, they're so numb, it's not wrong anymore, and now it's like they're flaunting it. They're like, it's become so numb. The third step is it becomes public, and you're okay with it. You'll see this again, people having affairs. They'll become so far into it sometimes, like, yeah, forget you, I'm leaving my wife, I'm leaving my husband, I don't care. I don't even think it's wrong anymore, and I'm going to tell everybody about it. This is a huge step toward the futile life. And we all do this. At some point, we take a step as we're backsliding away, the sin takes over, we become numb, and as we're stepping further away, we begin to brag even about the sin that we're engaged in. We begin to make it public, and we're kind of okay with it. Like, forget you if you know. We don't care anymore. This is a huge problem for Paul. That as people move into this space, they don't hide it anymore, they flaunt it. Now, of course, that's a huge part of the culture out there. We flaunt our sins, we put it on TV, we let everybody know the things we're doing. But as church people, we understand we don't do that. As we struggle, we keep it private, we try and work through it. As struggles become public, we hope that heals someone. You're not doing it to brag about it. And as people are doing that, they are one step further away from Christ in this 3 or 4 step process. This is where I see it. People begin to flaunt it. They are beginning to engage in every kind of impurity. It means we have moved from numbness to a place of flaunting it toward total futility in our life. Spinning of wheels, purposelessness, all of that stuff. The third thing here, he says, is they are full of greed. They are full of greed. As Barclay says, this is the accursed love of possessions. As Paul looked into the Roman culture, he didn't just see those whose hearts had become like stone. He didn't just see those who would brag about the various sins and things that they would normally, normal, decent people would probably even try and hide. He looked out there and he saw that people took great pain in trying to get stuff for themselves over and above other people's feelings. What this word in the Greek describes is someone who will step on everyone else to get what he wants. The last move of someone stepping out of a relationship with God, not only will their heart become hard, and they will begin to see it as not wrong and become numb, not only will they begin to flaunt it, but they will begin to step on every relationship necessary to get what they want. Everyone knows someone like this. If you don't, it might be you. It might be, okay? Now, you'll notice something about this. This person is someone who has no empathy left because they've gone through all these stages. They're so far from God. I want to be happy. Paul saw Roman culture. These people would stomp all over each other to become happy. I can step on you. I'll leave my wife. I'll leave my husband. I'll hurt my family. I don't care. I want to be happy. That's what's most important. At the very bottom of the backsliding, at the very end sign of a life of futility, is the desire to what I want is what I want, and I will step on who I step on. And this is why it's connected to greed. I will make the money I make, and I do not care who gets hurt as long as I make my money. Very deeply connected to greed in our culture. Very, very deeply connected. This is a woman who will harm whoever to be happy or have something. This is a man who would sacrifice his entire neighborhood, all his friends, to get the thing he wanted. That is Paul's bottom rung. Now, why do I tell you all this? I tell all this, first of all of us will do this at some point. And by the grace of God, he will begin to show you, as you engage in your escapes too much, that you're moving down a very futile path. In the grace of God, you will be able to go, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I got to step back a little bit here. I need to stop engaging in this escape. The problem is, once we move into the pattern that Paul's talking about, it will probably take someone else in our life to snap us out of it. Once we become numb to a sin, it's really hard for us to feel like it's wrong again. Okay? It's really hard on our own reading our Bibles because we just don't feel like it's wrong anymore. And once we're numb to it, we're just going to keep doing it over and over again. Okay? And so we need to take a step back. And many of us are not this fortunate that we get to do this. Many of us need other believers to step in. Hey, you know what? I see you're taking a lot of time on that hobby of yours. Maybe you restore cars, maybe you garden. And I appreciate you love it, but it seems to be ruling you a little bit. It seems to define who you are. And I think it's a great escape that you do, but there's a real life out here where people need you. And I know it's hard sometimes, but... And again, there can be seasons where, someone has died you love. Escape away. There's times where it's like, you should spend 2 months in the garden or buried in novels. I think that's great. But at some point as a friend, you know when it's like they're escaping too much. I've stepped into my friends' lives whose parents have died. And I watched them escape, and I could hear God's voice clearly go, now. And I went to them with very strong messages that I love them, and it's time to stop now and grow up. And it wasn't very fun. I didn't enjoy doing it, but it was time. You could hear the voice of God clearly. Now is the time to step back in their life. They've had their fun. They've been able to escape for a while, and now it's time to step in. Okay. It's time to step in when people become numb. It's time to step in when people are bragging about sin, and it's time to step in when people are hurting each other to be happy. These are the steps downward. We must step into each other's lives as early as possible. By the way, if you get to full of greed step and people are stomping all over lives, it's probably too late. You can step in at that point, but it's probably too late. At the point they don't care what anybody thinks, and they're crushing people's lives for the alcohol they love or drugs or whatever it is, at that point it's really far down, okay? It's really, really far down. Now this is not just, by the way, escape that you don't like. You ever heard of LARP? Anybody know what LARP is? LARP is called live action role play, okay? And live action role play is where people actually dress up like knights with foam swords, and they run around forests and they fight each other. And they pretend they're knights, and some of them are magicians, and they throw tennis balls at each other. Lightning bolt, lightning bolt. It's sad. It's not what I would enjoy, okay? If you enjoy that, good for you. I would not enjoy that. But I'm not going to step in your life because I don't like your hobby. Unless I think the hobby's evil. For the most part, if you do something I don't enjoy, I'm not going to step in and be like, you're dumb for liking that. There's a difference between that and you watch someone's life deteriorating because they're living in it, okay? So as we step into people's lives, it's not just that we don't like their hobby, it's that we are concerned for them in and around their hobby. Is their work being affected because they're living in front of their TV or they're engaging too much? I watch marriages deteriorate completely because of this game called World of Warcraft. And guys and women will come home from work and spend 8 hours all night playing this video game online, and they'll get up in the morning and they'll go back to work and do it all again. Do I think video games are wrong? No, I kind of enjoy them sometimes. You could get mad at me later for that, that's fine. But I don't go home and play 8 hours. I would be concerned with a friend of mine that was engaging too much. And that's a first step towards sliding away from God, in my opinion. So here's how it works. First time is always prayer. You do not ever move into these situations without having a long conversation with God. God has to make me leave my own business. Okay? That's how I work with him now. When it's time to step in, he pushes me into it. I know pretty strongly through a lot of prayer that it's time to step into a life and have a kind of conversation with a friend of mine. Okay? Do you have friends who don't see something as wrong anymore? Who excuse their really evil behavior? Who engage in escapes too much? They are moving toward a life of futility. And we want to step in before that life becomes futile, because guess what? That's our job. As Christians, we watch other Christians slide. It's our job to step in. That's who we are. God showed it to you because it was yours. If you see your friend slipping, do not assume someone else saw it. That's yours. He didn't show you so you could tell me. I will pray for you, and I will send you back in. I will not talk to them for you as a pastor, unless there's something abusive or you're worried about. For the most part, I'm going to send you back in. Because you saw it, God showed it to you, you become wonderfully responsible for that person. So the first thing I do, if I see Christians who have started to be open about sin and are willing to hurt others, and we have concerns about this person escaping too much, as I pray really hard, and then we step in, okay? Now, as a college group and our corner group, our young adult group on Friday nights, we put together kind of a ways we would want to step in a kind of this really neat discussion. And the first thing we realized is you got to do it in a neutral space. So I have a friend of mine who's struggling. I'm going to step into a neutral space with him, okay? I'm not going to call them to my office. Come sit in my office. It's the principal's office. You are in big trouble. Does not help conversations, okay? Do not sit them down somewhere and you stand over them like this. Not helpful, okay? Bring them to a coffee shop, bring them to a restaurant, sit them down, and have a normal time with them. This is not to manipulate them, it's to have a normal friend conversation with them. And at some point in the conversation, we would say something like, I am worried for you. There's a very big reason we use our own feelings, as we talked about last week with guys, or our own concerns, because you can't argue my concern. If a friend of mine is spending 10 hours a day playing a video game, he can't argue the fact that I'm worried about him. He can't. He doesn't get to do that. I'm worried. Well, you shouldn't be worried. Well, I am. That's just what it is. So I would convey to him how I'm feeling about what's happening. I would convey to him my concern about him or her and the behaviors I see and the life of futility I see them going toward. I am worried about you. By the way, you should be praying in your head while you're talking to him like crazy. Okay? Here's the thing you're going to do too. It's really hard. Listen. So as you express your worry, as they talk back to you, it's not argue time, it's listen time. Listen to where they're at. Listen to why they're escaping so much. Maybe something is going on in their life. Maybe something dark is happening you had no idea about. To sit with a friend was the right thing to do, and they're escaping to get away from something. Ask them what it is. Ask them why they're struggling. Ask them what they're afraid of. This is the kind of conversations you and I need to have all the time. We pray, we step in and we express worry, and we listen to their concerns as well. My friends, any given time, all of us will move toward futility. All of us will backslide. All of us will do this, period. Some of us in this room are now doing that. I challenge you to step into those lives. May God reveal to you when your escapes become your focus. And may you listen before things get dire. However, if you see friends around you who are struggling, may you all be real friends. May you see those that are moving out of their faith around you, and may you have the courage to have a prayerful conversation with them as they escape, as they get numb. May you see it with God's eyes, and may you step in with his kindness. Father, I am a very stubborn person in this area, Father. You know that. I'm not someone who likes to get into other people's business. But this is the place you've asked us to get in other people's business. Father, as we are challenged to step into each other's lives and challenge each other on struggles, or even where we see people getting numb with sin, Father, give us great grace and give us great courage. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you, Crossroads Church, and we will see you next week.